My name is Valerie Norville. I'm NASBE's editorial director, and we have such an excellent panel today to talk about state and federal efforts to enable all students to access effective instruction in an online environment, which I feel sure has is a high priority for all of you if it wasn't already with this year. As Richard mentioned, we had the Q&A function for you in Whova. We have the chat function for you to share comments with attendees. You can hit refresh at any time if you're running into technical difficulties. And this session is being recorded and will be available later for everybody who didn't get this on the first pass. I am pleased to introduce the moderator for today's session, Richard Culatta, the CEO of Iste, which is an international society that helps its members use technology effectively to transform learning. Take it away, Richard.
All right, thank you. I'm glad to be here. By the way, I think I was teasing everybody because I was saying, go ahead and use the chat, and it actually looks like the chat is disabled, and it actually looks like Q&A is also disabled. So we're gonna have to like mind read.
We will get you the questions.
Awesome. If it's possible to turn that on, that would be fantastic because then I can see them as they're coming in. And if it's possible to turn on chat, that'd be even better. But if not, we will make it work. Thank you so much for having the chance to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation. And we just as a quick intro, I will share who is here with us today. Although I'm going to ask each of you to give a little bit of your background when I ask you to share some of your thoughts. But first, we have Jason Dean, who is the chairman of the Mississippi State Board of Education, and also co-aviation enthusiast, I just learned, so that's fun. We have Janice Mack, who's part of the Arizona State Board of Education. She's a member, and also, I have to admit, share with you a 2018 Iste Advocacy Award winner, and we're incredibly happy and proud of the work that she does. And then a good friend who we've worked together since back when I was working at the U.S. Department of Education, Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel from the Federal Communications Commission, who has been tirelessly advocating for and a voice for improving connectivity. First was about connectivity to schools, now about connectivity to home. And so we're really thrilled to have you all here. My name is Richard Culatta. I'm the CEO of Iste, the International Society for Technology and Education. We are a large nonprofit organization. Our mission is to help use technology to help solve tough problems in education, to help bring innovation, to help make sure teachers and students are supported. And we'll share a little bit about just the kind of 30-second version, no, 20-second version of what Iste does, in case you're not familiar. We have a number of online programs that we create for teachers. We have our what's known as the Online Learning Boot Camp. It's called our ISTU Online Teaching Academy. It's a program for teachers who are less familiar teaching online. They can come and very quickly get up to speed on some really solid principles for effective learning. We've had about 25,000 teachers go through that program already, and it's a great program. We also host events. Normally they're face-to-face. This year they are virtual. So we will be in about a month, we'll be hosting our main event, which is called Iste Live. And that is happening online, and it will bring together about 15,000 or so education leaders, professionals from around the world to share best practices. And so we invite you to be aware of those and join those as well. One final thing that I'll say in my kind of opening comments here is we are really excited about an ongoing partnership that we've had between Iste and NASBE. We have several years ago came together and said, look, we're getting a lot of questions from state boards asking what their role should be when it comes to issues of technology. And this was pre-COVID, obviously, right? But how do we do this? How do we do the rollout? And we really are the experts in this space, but we're not the experts in the state board space. And it's not, the group that we generally work work with. And we said, man, if we could just work together, we could do some amazing things. And so Valerie and the other members of her team kicked off this partnership, and we've done some really great things together. We've done some articles that have highlighted the important role of state boards in making good technology decisions. And we continue to advocate for making sure that state boards are thinking about technology, not just in terms of connectivity. Connectivity is super important. Commissioner Rosenworcel is going to talk to us about that in a minute, but we can't just stop there, right? We can't just be happy that we get kids plugged in and then not have an excellent high quality learning experience to deliver. Otherwise, we've spent a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money on something that isn't going to give us the value that we need. And so these are some of the points that Iste and NASBE together have been working on sharing. And so we're really grateful for that partnership. Okay, well, that's enough preamble there. I've set the stage. So let's dive into this conversation. And what I'd like to do, we're going to talk a little bit about our current state and how we got here, what we're doing, and if those states that are still in emergency mode, if we can call it that. But I'm also going to shift us as we get into this conversation to thinking a little bit farther down the road, right? How do we leverage this moment, not just to get through, but really as an opportunity to rethink and reset the future of learning? And I really do think we have an incredible opportunity here. It feels a little weird to call COVID an opportunity, but we really do. And so we'll get into that, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. So let's start here. Janice, let me start with you, actually. And so I'd like you to share a little bit about the work that you've been doing in your role. And this is, pre-pandemic, right? This is stuff that you've been working on for a while. What was some of the work that you had been doing to build capacity for digital learning, and this is important, both pre-service and in-service levels, right? You've been looking at both. What have you been doing in the last sort of 6 to 7 months with your board, hat on in this board responsibility? And what can you tell us about this journey?
Thank you, Richard. So I sit at the intersection of being on the state board and policy, but also in implementation, being an educator and being a researcher as well. So I see the policy come through to the educators. And I think as far as building capacity, we're really leveraging those partnerships. So for example, we have a big public-private partnership going on right now with ASU Digital Prep. So leveraging their expertise and the intersection they have going on with the intersection of evidence-based practices, the learning sciences with teaching digitally, along with the Arizona Department of Education, the governor's office, and Helios. So that they are launching a virtual teacher institute to every single teacher in the state of Arizona. And so it started off with a few full day workshops, and then moving on to on demand, so job embedded, really working to support systems. So at a local level, districts can sign up for appointments and get support. And so I think it really leverages every level of the system. So you have a larger state partnership, but then supporting districts and balancing the support from the state with the local context. So it really drills down to what we know as the 3 C's, right? So every child living in their context with high quality content. So really, you see that kind of thing working out, which is amazing. And we are in the middle of now, we have convened stakeholders. So we have a statewide task force, and a part of the conversation is launching new EdTech standards, so very timely. And then along with that will come considerations regarding looking at our pre-service education. So what is the teacher certification look like? Does it really, we are living in times where every teacher really needs this. So we are beginning to look at that as well, and looking at examples from other states, continuing the conversation with Iste and NASBE as well. So,
yeah, thanks. I love this point that you brought up of looking at both teachers that are coming into the pipeline. This really matters because what we're seeing, and for those of you that aren't familiar, one of our sort of areas, one of our initiatives is an initiative called EdSurge, which is a great reporting team that collects the stories and news of the education world. And by the way, completely free. So if you don't sign up for EdSurge, you should absolutely do that. But one of the things that we're seeing through that reporting is, a real demand for new teachers, as some teachers are choosing to retire, as some are shifting out of the role. And what we're hearing from schools is that a lot of the teachers coming in actually have significantly less, surprisingly, less experience teaching in virtual spaces than the teachers that were in the school already, right? You'd think sometimes we have this idea of like, well, you know, these new kids coming in, they're all tech savvy, but it's actually not the case. And being familiar and comfortable using devices is not the same as knowing how to use it for teaching. So I think it's really critical that we're thinking about that as well. Jason, let's go over to you. Same question. Just tell us sort of what your journey has been. Where are you at currently? And you know, what thoughts do you have for us in your role?
Yeah, well, thanks for the invitation to be a part of this panel. It's always a pleasure to be able to come in and brag about some good things that are happening in Mississippi. I would say previous to COVID, I couldn't really, do a panel on what we're doing around digital learning in Mississippi. I could talk, briefly about it, but my recollection is there really wasn't just a whole bunch going on. We were focused on things like, computer science and coding, but not necessarily like digital learning. And I'll say, because I'm always going to do a commercial for Mississippi, before COVID, our kids were actually like knocking it out of the park. They had crossed over the national average with NAEP. They had exceeded the national average with high school graduation rates. The number of our districts had doubled that were A-rated, doubled year over year, and while we increased standards, by the way. So lots of good stuff was happening for our students in public schools in Mississippi. And then, bam, this happens, and it's just, so frustrating. But someone said a little bit earlier, I'll say it a different way. Innovation can, disruption can lead to innovation, and if you take advantage of that opportunity, leadership can shine through, and things can happen. And and that's actually the story that we tell now. So there's a lot of challenges that we have ongoing. So I don't want to diminish that. But one of the great things that has happened as part of the CARES Act money that was appropriated to the state of Mississippi, our state got $1.25 billion. Of that money, the legislature set aside $200 million, about a little less than 20%, to buy a Wi-Fi enabled device for every student in the state of Mississippi. Those are Chromebooks, those are Apple tablets. So that's a big deal. We're going to be one-to-one. And oh, by the way, that's all going to be delivered by November 20th. Because it was such a large order, we went to the top of the line for all the all the logistics, and Apple and the Chromebook. Everybody sort of said put Mississippi first. So I just took a tour last week. We had our board meeting. After the board meeting, took a tour of the warehouse, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of computers there being programmed so that they're delivered to the districts. They've already started going out the door. Like I said, that should be no later than November 20th. So, I will save comments for a little bit later, but we have an enormous opportunity. We have a challenge, and I think that we're meeting that challenge. But we convinced the legislature that this is an opportunity to take a huge step forward for students in the state of Mississippi, and they agreed and appropriated this money. And by the way, we also appropriated $50 million on top of that for school districts to address broadband connectivity issues, which is another issue. And there's other dollars appropriated to our rural electric power associations to do optic fiber. So, I mean, while this has been, devastating for the state of Mississippi in a lot of ways, I got to say, the optimist in me is like, hey, we can point to some things that really are going to make a difference in the long run.
Yeah. So thank you. Great points. And we are going to come absolutely back to that in a second. But I want to take advantage of that segue a little bit and talking about your planning around connectivity to bring in Commissioner Rosenworcel. And as I mentioned in the opening, Commissioner, you have been really a champion for thinking about the role, how important we need to be thinking, the importance of the role of connectivity that we need to be thinking about in the learning experience. Can I ask you to just give me the sort of quick update on some of the work that you did previously, right, with helping us get all schools connected to broadband as part of the E-rate update, in case people don't know about that. And then we'll talk about some of what you're working on now.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's good to see you, and thank you for having me. I love the optimism that I just heard coming from Arizona and Mississippi, and you've got this sentiment that I share, that out of this crisis, we're going to do something. We're going to take this as an opportunity to really build digital equity into education. And so I've been working on that a long time ago. At the Federal Communications Commission, I oversee a program called E-Rate. And maybe you've heard of E-Rate, maybe not. I think it's a quiet powerhouse. It is our nation's largest education technology program. It helps support internet connections in schools in every state in this country. And what's really amazing about E-Rate is it was a byproduct of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. I mean, remember 1996? Like, I called the internet the information superhighway. Maybe you did too. It was a long time ago. But Washington actually saw that long ago that this connectivity was going to be essential for education. And so during the last administration, there was an effort to update E-Rate so that it really met the digital age, so that classrooms didn't just get pokey internet service that was like the hiss and ding of dial-up. They actually got real broadband. And that's continued under this administration, which is really good news because we want every classroom to have the broadband they need for education. So fast forward to the moment we're in, millions of kids have been sent home for hybrid, remote learning, what have you. And we have in the process exposed a very important part of the digital divide that I call the homework gap, because those kids have connectivity in school, but as many as 17 million don't have it at home. And right now, that doesn't just mean they can't do their homework. It means they're locked out of the virtual classroom. So what I'd like us to do is to look at that E-Rate program and update it to meet this moment. It could be used to support things like the wireless hotspots that are for loan from some of our schools and school libraries. We got to think creatively about what the classroom means right now and how this program, which has been terrific for more than 2 decades, can really help us manage in this crisis. And then when we get to the other side, make sure that no child is left offline.
Thank you. Thank you.
You saw what I did
way,
there, by the way.
What's that?
All you education people saw what I did there. No child left offline, no child left behind.
We did catch that. That was not lost on anybody on here.
I know.
Hey, so I think, so first of all, you commented on E-Rate, and it's interesting because, you know, it is a sort of a quiet program there, and it is entirely possible that we may have some people on in board roles that are not familiar with E-Rate, maybe are newer to their roles. So I think it is important to make sure this is one of the most impactful education programs that exists. And interestingly, it's run out of the FCC, which is just important to note because often we think, well, Department of Education, and there are some, having formerly worked there's some really great things happening there, but this is one of the most critical programs that you need to know about. You just need to be aware because this program is covering the cost of connectivity to your schools. As the commissioner mentioned, right now it stops at the door, right? It doesn't go beyond it. Great that it goes to the school. When I came to work for the previous administration and walked in, we had about 12% of schools that were connected to broadband. So we made huge, it's at, I think 99 some plus percent now. So huge strides there, but we have to recognize that, the learning doesn't stop at the end of the school day. And certainly now we need connectivity at home too. So thank you for that. Let's go to another question that I've had. I know when I talk to state board leaders, they often ask what the role of the state board should be when it comes to making decisions about connectivity, whether it's teacher training for connectivity, whether it's these connections themselves, making sure that they're making sure students have access from home. But what's the role of the state board, right? It's not exactly the same as somebody who's on staff at the district or certainly at the state office of education, and for those where they're two separate entities. Janice and Jason, can you just jump in on that? What do you see your role in making sure technology is being used effectively, but squarely within the responsibilities of a board member?
Go ahead, Janice. I'll go after you.
Well, I think we'll just preface this by saying, as always, that every state board has different roles and responsibility. So in our state, in Arizona, for example, standards for learning fall into our responsibility. So I can really see that as a powerful place in partnership with the Department of Education, where that can be impactful. Certification and endorsements is another one. And then I think the other thing that NASBE always talks about is the power to convene and the power to question. And I think those are two powerful levers that we can leverage as state board members. And so in partnership with the Superintendent for Public Instruction in Arizona, I'm chairing the task force to address digital divide in our state. And so to that end, we've convened rural, we've convened, our internet providers, we've higher ed, we've convened superintendents, CIOs, CTOs, and we've brought these people to the table to really innovate and come up with a solution. So how are we going to get to this point where we make learning possible for every child, no matter where they live? Our state is very diverse. We have representatives from the Navajo Nation on our task force, right? We are a state with 22 tribes, tribal nations. So it's really, really important that we have all these players at the table to really convene and to really think of this through. So I think that those are some powerful things that the state board can absolutely do and engage in to really make sure that we are taking it to the next level, and not just the digital divide, but really thinking beyond that to the digital use divide. We do not want it to be a perpetuating where we have just kids that are still, we have this digital use divide where we have kids that are passively consuming technology, right? Versus kids that are collaborating and getting global speakers into the classroom and creating and innovating and making apps and, learning about artificial intelligence and things that are going to really solve some of these problems that we have, right? So we want to make sure that at the same time we're providing access, we are also being intentional with the digital teaching and learning opportunities and the equity and access to those opportunities that we have. So
a lot in there. I want to, Jason, let me go over to you, and then let's unpack a little bit these important roles of the state board. You add to that, my friend. Go ahead.
First of all, no child left offline. I'm totally going to steal that. So just letting you know now, I'll cite my source, but that's going to be bounced around at our next board meeting. I love that. And Janice nailed it. I mean, all those things, yes. And that's, the first thing that we, did. I mean, Mississippi is a small state spread over a large geography. It's more like a country club than a state. I mean, it's very easy to know everybody. There were 2.9 million people, so that's less than 1% of the nation's population. And it's very easy to, particularly, I'm the chairman of the state board, so I get a lot of the attention during the time that I hold the gavel. And it's very easy to go and have conversations directly with the governor, directly with the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor, and really advocate in a way that I think our staff at the department, who are very capable, do a tremendous job, but they're the usual suspects. So, whenever I am able to carry the water a little bit on the political messaging, when we need, either laws change, or in the case right after COVID, we got executive order authority to waive statute and waive regulations. That was massive. And it was a very, serious responsibility. I was Governor Haley Barber's education policy advisor during Hurricane Katrina. And during the time of, right after COVID, it reminded me a lot of that, because previous to that, I think, politicians and folks who aren't directly engaged in the education process, they understood our role, and they sort of, they're doing their thing. But man, when it, came time to like, okay, like, for example, the Hurricane Katrina, wiped out half the Gulf Coast and lots of schools, the people down there looked to the government to say, you're in a position to help us. And I think I felt that way from the governor's office and his staff, who I'm, super close to. They were like, okay, education, what do you need from us to make sure that we're addressing this crisis? And so I've been on the board, I guess, 5 or 6 years, and I felt like, I was doing my job, and certainly felt, gratified and satisfied with, the opportunity to serve. But like at that moment, it was like, oh, this is serious. We're in a crisis. Let's all, roll up our sleeves and work together to get it done. So, just to sum it up, I think the political connection is really key. And if you have that relationship with your executive office or the legislature, it's that much easier.
Great point. And by the way, we have some questions that are already starting to come in, so I'm going to work them into our conversation. But I just want to highlight a couple points that you made that are really important here, both of you. Is these roles of the state board members are so important. So one that came up in both of your comments is this convening power, right? You have this sort of very unique ability to get people to come in a room and talk to each other. And that may seem like a little thing. It may seem like, why am I making such a big deal about that? That is huge. You have no idea how many problems in education can just be solved if we can get people talking across some of these traditional boundaries. And to be clear, I've worked my whole career in education. This is not because people don't want to work together. It's not because of, it is that we have people that are incredibly busy trying to solve issues on the higher ed side, trying to solve issues on the K-12 side. And sometimes in that well-intentioned focus, sometimes there isn't that opportunity to cut across sectors, particularly when it's involving people outside of the education domain, like technology providers or other nonprofit organizations that can help with teacher preparation or whatever. And so that role of being a convener, super important. Janice, you mentioned the role of setting standards, setting a framework. For the states that I can think of that are most effective at implementing technology are ones where the state board said, here's some guiding frameworks that can help provide a structure for this to happen. You don't implement it. You don't, handle the in the weeds details of how it's all going to work. But if you set up some parameters, what are the things that you're looking for? That can be very helpful. Every state in the US has adopted something that we create called the Iste Standards. This is a set, they're not curricular standards, they are a set of guidelines for how to help have conversations about how to use technology effectively. But many states have taken them and said, well, we're gonna actually blend them in and add some other additional state-specific items or call out a couple that are gonna be really our area of focus. All of that is really powerful when it's coming from people in your roles, because it gives so much more helpful structure to the people that are trying to implement these programs. Commissioner, I'm going to ask you the same question now, which is also for state board leaders with their hat on. Give us some homework. What is it that you need them to do truly to help make a difference for closing this homework gap?
First, learn about the E-rate program. Like you mentioned, Richard,
Yep.
It is a really powerful program. It's actually run by the Federal Communications Commission, not the Department of Education. It provides over $4 billion to states to help them with internet connections. More funding is available for schools in rural areas and schools with higher percentages of students on free and reduced lunch programs. It is, in many respects, a map of where we're likely to see kids who come from households without reliable internet access. And so one of the things that I think would help when it comes to figuring out the homework gap is doing an assessment at the state or local level to try to get a read of how much connectivity students have at home. In a rural community, it might be because the infrastructure is not present. In other communities, it might be because affording the cost of a recurring service might be too much for most households to bear. And yet in other places, you might find that there are students that have internet access, but maybe it's, I don't know, the data capped phone that gets borrowed to get used for a certain number of virtual classes. And you exhaust those minutes and that capacity real fast. So trying to identify in some kind of consistent way what the homework gap looks like in your community will help at the federal, state, and local level identifying solutions. Yeah. I regret at the FCC, we don't have a perfect picture of that. We're not really well suited to figure that out, but you folks are. Mm-hmm. And I believe if you start quantifying it, we're going to start developing solutions. That old maxim, we don't manage what we do not measure, I think comes to mind here. And this moment, this crisis where so much of school has gone online is the perfect time as a community to come together and do that.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the questions actually that came in from one of our board members here was, how can boards partner with the FCC/E-rate on addressing this? So you just gave a great example, which is start collecting the data, right? I remember when we were looking at the first updates to E-rate that we made, a number of years ago now, one of the biggest changes, one of the biggest things that we did to push that over the line was just getting data, real data from schools on what the gap actually was, right? And so I think that there's a similar, sounds like you're saying a similar assignment for boards to think about for kind of quantifying where we're at with the homework gap.
Absolutely. And, I mean, maybe you've seen it too. Those two little girls sitting outside of a Taco Bell in Salinas, California, with laptops on their hands. And, they're not there for lunch. They're there because they were trying to use that free wireless signal.
Yeah.
If you see kids like that in your towns and your communities, just use it as a rallying cry to start counting this problem. When we understand the scope of it, we'll develop solutions that help fix it.
Yeah. And another board member asked the question, and I'll just ask it very bluntly. What is your thought on the likelihood that we will be able to have success here? Will E-rate be able to be expanded in this way? Commissioners on mute. That's not a good sign.
No,
okay.
Right. Okay, so I'm an impatient optimist. I've been talking about the homework gap for a very long time, because I know when I was growing up, it was like paper, pencil, and my brother leaving me alone, and we were set. I could do my nightly schoolwork. It's just not true anymore. Your teachers across the country are assigning homework that assumes some level of internet access. We got to figure out how every student gets that at home. To me, it's no different, frankly, than just, loaning them out a grammar workbook or a math textbook. This is what you need for school. And what we should do is update the E-rate program to reflect that. There's legislation, the HEROES Act in the House, the Emergency Educational Connections Act in the Senate, that all talk about doing this. There were efforts in the past stimulus bill that we just heard about, referred to from Mississippi, the CARES Act, that allowed for some funds to be spent on this. But I believe in the end, if you develop a national plan for this, you're going to get some national savings. You're going to do this at scale. We're going to create a standard, and it's going to bring everyone, no matter where they live, to sort of level of digital equity that they get a fair shot in education. And I think E-rate has proven to be the program that can do this in the past. We just got to update it for the future. I'm still all in. I believe it's possible. I'll be cranky and relentless until we get it done. That much I can tell you.
Never cranky, but we appreciate your relentlessness. Seriously.
Cranky with a smile. I don't know.
That's right. Good. Let's transition a little bit. So one of the questions that came in was on the learning experience, and particularly thinking about how are we addressing issues of equity. And when we think about online learning, issues of equity, yes, clearly there's connectivity issues of equity, but in this case, I'd like you to think about the learning experience. So students with special needs, young learners, and I would say, I would call, especially when it's online learning, there's definitely, we could classify young learners as special needs when we're talking about online learning, right? Students, certainly English learners, et cetera. Talk a little bit about how you are looking at that and approaching that as a board member, and making sure we're addressing issues of equity as we transition to online learning and blended learning.
I'll take a crack at that.
Yeah, please.
Before I do, just real quick on E-rate, that's a big issue, and probably spent an enormous amount of our first discussions around what do we do if we all go virtual around E-rate before the CARES Act money came through. And Senator Roger Wicker from Mississippi, our senior senator, is chairman of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. And I can assure you, he's all about changing E-rate. And I offer, that to anybody who wants to have an additional conversation. We've, lobbied him heavily from the education community along those same lines that have been mentioned. So believe me, that is, it's being heard at least on the Senate side as well. But briefly, I'll just answer the question. So, again, it's the remarkable thing is we're going one-to-one. We'll be one-to-one for computers. So that's wonderful. But I say that's just mountain number one of about three. And the logistics of getting those computers out are enormous, but we're going to be successful in that. Mountain number two is around professional development. And to me, that's equally important. Big deal that you've got 465,000 students all with computers. If they don't know how to use it, mom and daddy, grandma don't know how to use it, or administrators, teachers, et cetera, that's a real problem. So we've focused additional resources for professional development, right off the bat. To ensure that, if there's, a digital divide that needs to be addressed, that's kind of, the front line that we do it. But also, I'm working with the governor and his staff. He's got a discretionary pot of money. Every governor got a pro rata share. It's called the GEER, GEER. And we've set aside priority tasking specifically to address those particular students who might need extra remote learning support, whether that's, from special needs or around social and emotional learning or whatever. We don't really define it too much, but that RFP is coming out at the end of this month, and we hope to get a lot of really great ideas and how we can sort of, wrap our arms around this challenge and put resources out there to get it done.
I'm going to just ask you to dive a little deeper. You talked about the work that you're doing for teacher professional development, and you mentioned GEAR, which is great, and I hope everybody's aware of the GEAR funding. Give an example or two, if you don't mind, about what does that look like? So you get some money, but what are you actually doing for teachers to make sure they're getting up to speed?
Yep. So we've this is being led by our state superintendent of education. The SEA's also got a pot of discretionary money. So she got about $16 million. Our governor got about 34 million. And like I said, we're working closely, but I can tell you right now, what's already been established is like a digital learning coach core. So these folks are, like I said, going out, with the computers. They might even be riding the trucks that are delivering. I'm not sure, but the computers show up, they show up. So it's very critical. From my point of view, there's so many concerns that wake me up in the middle of the night. One is, $150 million worth of computers are out there. We can track them. Like, I'm not so worried about them being stolen. I'm worried about them breaking. I've got 3 kids. I mean, I get it. I've replaced too many computer screens, but I'm super worried about, okay, you got it. And like, so many of our districts are all virtual right now and have been since August. So it's like, get after it. So I think this digital learning coach core is really, the very first tangible first step. But it's got to be, persistent and ongoing for at least a couple of years. So I think it's a three-year program that we have for that.
So thank you. That's a great example. And I think something else that's important for state board members to be looking at is, look at your numbers. And one of the things that you can see is if you're looking at investment numbers and you're seeing 150 million in devices, and that's certainly reasonable given the size of your state. But if you're looking and seeing for the professional development, right, $1 million, right that's a question you should be asking right there. Something's probably a little out of balance if there's a huge amount of money that's being spent on the devices and almost nothing being spent on the use of the devices. Janice, you mentioned the digital use divide, et cetera. And so that's just a good question to ask. And it's incredible how powerful in your state board role questions can be. Just simply asking the question of, so what's the plan to make sure teachers are using these tools in the best way, right? So watch those numbers. Janice, on your side, thoughts on that? What have you been looking at, particularly around issues of preparing around equity and helping students with special needs?
Well, I think this is a really big issue, and there's so many tools to be leveraged right now in this arena. But I think I learned a lot from looking at Utah, and I know NASBE and Iste wrote some papers together, but looking at their example of really focusing on the access as one leg of the stool, the professional learning, teaching and learning as another leg of the stool, and the third leg is sustainability. So really making sure that we're addressing all 3 at the same time is the real challenge. And so I think so much about our most vulnerable learners. And I think back to like my school district where we tracked down a homeless student and we're able to go to the shelter and give her a hotspot. Like, this is what we're talking about. It's making sure every kid gets to school. So no student is left offline, exactly as the commissioner said. And it really plays out like that on a case-by-case basis. And so I think data is critical. How are we measuring? So I know we've been working with the Department of Education to collect district plans for what is your plan for this time of remote learning, and really seeing what is happening at the districts, and then having questions. Like you said, the questions are powerful. So in those district plans, we're asking those questions. What is your plan for the curriculum? What is your plan for your platform? What is your plan for these students? And the fact that districts have to write that in, and that they know that they're going to be randomly selected. We're going to go through them and kind of, go through that, not as a way to, I guess, not with a goal at all to, punish or at all. But I mean, it's just, I think the accountability piece is huge. It's learning for us to see what our district's doing in this time. We're really, like, this is all new to all of us. Like, what innovations are being done? What is out there? And I can tell you, districts are defining hybrid differently. Some are defining it as, I thought I knew what hybrid was before this pandemic, but I don't, because some schools are going like hybrid is like, you have your Monday, Wednesday, Friday group, and then you flip. Some are defining it as, you know, parents have a choice of whether to send their kids into school or not. And then that's hybrid because some kids are in school every day and some kids are at home every day learning connected. So I think we're finding a lot of redefining. And I think some of the real things that we need to consider on an implementation level and how we can measure this, again, is really looking at our accountability systems. Are we measuring for equity? Are we using valid and reliable sources of data? And do we need to relook at things for this period of time? And I think those are really critical. And then you think about the young learners, right? The need for hands-on exploration, the social emotional aspect, science. How are we doing science labs, right? In this age of the pandemic, there's a lot of things to consider and a lot of things across the spectrum that we can be looking at. So just.
Yeah. Thank you. Great points here. And I put the article that you mentioned in the chat as well. If people have other questions, please keep them coming. Let me just ask, and this is for the three of you. How do you stay on top of the possibilities? So Janice, you mentioned just in your last comment here about being aware of all these opportunities and the right ways to be using technology. And one of the challenges that I've found is sometimes as we get into leadership roles as board members, et cetera, we have not, it's been a while since we've been in a school. It's been a while since we remember a very different education experience. And how do you stay on top of what the possibilities are? How do you keep on really the best ways of using technology? What are your strategies, and what would you recommend for other board members to just help them be aware?
Well, I think you mentioned one of great sources, EdSurge, and really subscribing to some of these things that come in on a weekly basis, and even just reading the headlines, you're like amazed at what's available out there. I mean, tools like Google Meet have literally transformed over this time of the pandemic, where like before, no breakout rooms, now you can do breakout rooms, now you can launch polls, now you can, and not to mention the stuff that some other companies are putting out as far as closed captioning resources, reading supports. These kind of things are transformative learning for all of our learners. And so I think it's critical that we are aware of all these things that are happening, and the ability to, I think the most exciting part of what's happening now is the potential to possibly really transform learning experiences for every one of our students. So the power of technology is to take us beyond the walls of the classroom. The power of technology is to connect us with people, right? And the power of technology is really getting to the point where we're going to be able to adapt learning experiences and give kids just-in-time learning. I mean, this is the stuff of dreams, right? Like that we dreamed of, even when we were kids, like we never felt like things were just right fit, right? And now with the way technology is headed, we really have this whole world, this vista ahead of us to really provide this personalized competency-based learning experiences for our students, no matter where they live. Excellence and equity, as NASBE likes to say.
Yeah, thank you. That it is hard to come up with a better answer than that to that question. But Jason or Jessica, any thoughts that you have on how you keep advice on just keeping for board members? How do they keep their vision in the right place for this?
I'll just add a really quick addition, because that's a trickier question than I think that you meant it to be. Because as a board member, we have a role in this leadership, but we're very fortunate to have a superstar CIO who I have full faith and confidence in. And so I use the philosophy of trust but verify. I trust, but I'm asking questions. And there is sometimes the opportunity to go chase a rabbit, that they might not be focused on. And I sort of say, hey, I'm doing this and making sure that's in the fold. An example of that is, we, through a conversation that our superintendent had with Betsy DeVos, we got connected to SpaceX's Starlink. And a very interesting technology. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it, low Earth orbit, but for a rural state like Mississippi, phenomenal upside possibilities instead of, while it's not like directly related to ed policy, it sort of kind of is, because we're never going to, unlike a Utah or maybe in Arizona, both places I've spent time, our rural areas aren't mountains and beautiful scenery. It's like there's somebody still living there, one person every 5 miles, but they're still there. So, trying to find other types of technology to help support the ultimate outcome, I think is a good role, for us to play, but also got to kind of know not to be too micromanaged.
Commissioner, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when we get to the other side of this crisis, I just feel like there's so much opportunity to look back and learn. So let's take advantage of that. And I want, the best educators to look at what worked digitally and what didn't. I want the best technologists to look at what networks worked and what didn't. I also think we should look at what created cyber vulnerabilities and what didn't. And again, let's use this crisis as an opportunity to assess. We were all forced into the future. Where are the deficiencies? How can we address them going forward? I mean, I already see this homework gap and the absence of connectivity as one, but that's in my wheelhouse. That's what I spend my time on. I hope educators and security experts and others take advantage of this moment to look back and learn about what we can strengthen for the future.
Yeah, that's perfect. And we said we were going to go there. So let's just do it now. Let's talk about this a little bit. So I think we have, I've spent my whole career studying innovation. It's what I've done. I'm a geeky guy, and I've looked at how and when we see blooms of innovation. And I'll tell you that there is a pattern that we see. And that pattern is that there's always a bloom of innovation after a crisis, after a moment of disruption. It's just you see it over and over again at a macro level, after wars, after major ecological disasters, and at micro levels when there are forcing functions to make things shift around. And so when we look at this moment, this sort of COVID pandemic moment, and it's probably the most disruptive thing that has happened in education in certainly any of our lifetimes. And as frustrating as it is, I'm actually really optimistic and excited by the fact that it has given us a moment to reset and rethink some things that we couldn't even put on the table before. So I've been talking to several state leaders, and they've said, look, there were questions that I wasn't even allowed to ask, right? I couldn't even ask questions about, like, what can we count as instructional time, or how can we do assessments differently, or does do all the students have to be in one room with one instructor? So they're like, it wasn't even appropriate for me to ask the question. But now, because we've been forced into this moment where no question is too stupid to ask, because we're all in this weird position, right? It's possible to have us start to rethink some things, and that's exciting, right? That's exciting. I will say that if you look at how innovation works, again, looking at the history of innovation, while a crisis, a moment of crisis or disruption is a key lever that leads to innovation, it is not a guarantee. It's not causal, right? And so that's important, and that there's a lot of forcing functions in our education space that will say, no matter how great of an opportunity that we're given, if we're not intentional about deciding how to use this moment to bring a better future, I guarantee you it will revert right back to where it was. And I often joke about, sometimes I'm talking to people and they say, we've been we're so frustrated with this current education moment that we're in, and everything is, it's so disruptive. I was like, interestingly, 6 months ago, you were saying the same thing about this previous version that we were in. So let's take advantage of this time that we have to really rethink and reset some things while we can. So with that impassioned speech, I'm curious to ask each of you, what are you most excited about? When you think about the silver linings that we can think of in the future of education because of this moment, what are they? What are you most excited about having, look different in education next year because of what we're going through this year?
I feel like I'm hogging, so just tell me. But
Jump in.
hurt my feelings. But I am excited. I mean, I really am. And man, spot on. What you said was just so what I think about, all the time, like what truly is our role as the board. And, I talked about the first mountain is just getting the devices. The second one's professional development. That third mountain is, the big now what question that really I don't have an answer for, but I get it. It's an abstract concept, but it is the one that I think most about. Janice, I've wrote down, you said just in time learning. I don't even know what that is, but I think that's what I'm talking about. Okay. But like, what is it now that we have every single one of our students plugged in, and at least while at school, access to broadband, so you can download, take home, we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We have about 15 to 20% of our students don't have reliable access at the house, so we're working on that. But to me, I think just by virtue of the fact that we're going to be a state that has one-to-one Wi-Fi enabled devices for every public school student, it is incumbent upon us as leaders to absolutely 100% set the expectations for that. And we need to do it now because they're getting it now. And so within the next school year and the next and the next, like, if we don't push and say, you don't have access to a world-class teacher in your district, so what? Now you do. Bam, that's one. So I need to make a list and say, okay, guys, I know we're thinking about this, but it's up to us to ensure that we execute it. So big question, one that's definitely on our mind.
Yeah, I think it's a really big question, but I think the possibilities, and I think it really has to do with, again, getting all those stakeholders in the room, getting those conversations going, finding a path forward in our respective states, laying the groundwork for a lot of change. Some changes are going to come quickly, like maybe some funding will come really quickly and we'll be able to implement some things with a quick turnaround. But I think a lot of it is going to be foundational steps that we take. And so things like questions we can ask, like Richard said, like things about funding, things about seat hours, things about, and we may not even be the ones asking it, we're listening. So I think we need to also be really intentional in listening to what our schools and districts are telling us, because that is going to really help inform policy as well and next steps in our state. So to listen to all of their experience and to the commissioner's point of reflecting, I think it's really important to collect as much information as we can to really reflect on what worked and why it worked, where it worked, right? And what context and how and what patterns are we seeing. I think it's really important to take this time to be intentional about listening and reflecting and asking those questions and building a strong foundation for sustainability. So making sure that if we are asking for funding, hopefully it's renewable, right? Making sure that it's not competitive, so it doesn't leave schools and districts out, right? Making sure that we're intentional about building that system as well for equity and access, whatever that looks like in whatever state we're in. But I think those are all important things that I'm thinking about at this time, at least, is the gathering, the listening, the reflecting, and all of that. But excited about the possibilities for sure.
So I want to come out of this crisis and solve the homework gap. It's that simple. I think we can all do it if we work together, because this affects rural America, it affects urban America, it affects like everywhere in this country. And if we can agree that every student needs a reliable internet connection to have a fair shot at education today, well, I just think in the United States of America, we should be capable of delivering it. And it's probably going to start with folks like you surveying. What does it look like in your schools, in your towns, in your counties, in your states? And you start counting and seeing we have the same problem in Arizona as in Mississippi, as in New York City. And once we recognize that we have a common problem, I actually still have confidence we can come together and develop common solutions. I think we can build out the E-rate program to help solve the homework gap. But the bottom line is what I said before and what I'm going to put on a bumper sticker: leave no child offline. And I think we can do it. I think we should use this experience to make sure we solve the homework gap, and as Janice just said, in a sustainable way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It has been great to have a chance to hear from each of you, all doing really amazing work. I hope it's okay if people have questions or follow up that they can reach out to you. Certainly, I would also ask, as you're thinking about, everybody who's listening here, thinking about our continued partnership between Iste and NASBE, if there are things that you would like us to work on, if there's areas you'd like us to dive deeper in, focus on for future webinars, et cetera, please let us know. Please, because we want to be very responsive to you. We also, I'll mention that for those of you who are interested in learning more about some of the things that we talked about here, we have, as part of our upcoming Iste event, we have a session called our Digital Leadership Summit. And that is for state and district leaders and above, talking about some of these issues in greater detail. And we have a variety of state and district guests that are going to be coming in. So feel free to look that up. Let me just end with my final thought here, and then I'll turn it back over to Valerie. And that is that, again, we have a really really rare opportunity, and it's an opportunity to rethink and reset in a lot of ways. And as I think about all of the sort of tragedies of this last year, I can't help but think that the biggest possible tragedy would be to have school in January 2021 look the same as it did in January 2020, because we didn't take advantage of this moment to reset. And the opportunities are enormous. And if we can get it right, if we can have our vision set, and if we can remember that it's a combination of connectivity and closing the digital use divide, as Jenna said, how are we using these tools in really effective ways? We have a shot at not just getting through this crazy moment, but really creating a future learning environment, a future education ecosystem for this country that simply would not have been possible otherwise. So thank you for all you're doing, for the panelists that have joined us today, really inspired by your work. For all of you that are on the line, thank you for your continual fight, for asking the tough questions, for making the point to stay on top of the possibilities of technology, to be able to shape that vision, that structure, that framework for your states. The work you're doing has never been more important. Thank you very much. Val, over to you.
Thank you.